Hurricane Irma made landfall in Florida on September 10th, it was recorded as one of the strongest and largest storms ever in the Atlantic Ocean. It maintained 180-mile-per-hour wind speeds for 37 hours, setting a global record for the most intense storm for such a long duration. Millions evacuated. Millions were left without power as Hurricane Irma terrorized the entire state from coast to coast. So where does Mother Nature's wrath, which we continue to experience in the wake of Hurricane Maria, leave meeting professionals, from hoteliers, CVBs, convention centers, and of course, meeting planners with scheduled events? We've got the president and CEO of the Greater Fort Lauderdale CVB, Stacey Ritter, with us. Stacey, walk us through those pre-hurricane prep logistics. You know Irma's on her way, it's under no one's control, and it's all over the news. What's the immediate response from the GFL CVB?
Well, first, I'm glad you said that it's not under anyone's control, because sometimes I feel like people think we can control the weather, and we clearly cannot. So Irma starts to pop up, and we all kept a very close eye on it for about a week before as it continued to move through the Atlantic. And the Monday, I think it was September 5th, I want to say, when we looked at the cone, and it really did become very concerning. We were right in the middle of the cone of uncertainty, as we call it here in Florida. I brought my leadership team together, my PR people, my leisure sales guy, my administrative manager, and we sat around the table and we said, okay, so let's take out our hurricane plan. We have a hurricane plan. Let's see what the first steps are. And the very first thing we did was we put a conference call on with the entire industry. Everybody who we could reach out to, whether it was meeting planners, hotels, attractions, put a conference call on Tuesday morning to say, okay, now it's serious. We have to take a look at what's going on, and we've got to reach out and communicate to everybody in the industry to let them know what the county is doing, what the CVB is doing to make sure that we're all safe as the storm passes. And then during the week, we kept up those regular conference calls. We did regular updates as the county provided us with weather information from our emergency operations people. We just kept everyone informed, and that's the biggest thing that you can do, is just make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
So as we all know, Florida is prone to hurricanes. It's no surprise. There's a hurricane season every year. But what made Hurricane Irma different?
This storm was different. It was much larger, and much more powerful than anything that we have experienced. We had a near miss with Matthew last year, where at the very last minute veered away from us, but it wasn't as powerful a storm or as large a storm, and neither was Wilma in 2005 or Andrew in 92. Andrew was a powerful storm, but it was very small and very quick moving. Irma was a slow moving, powerful storm. Category 5 was what we were expecting until it shifted at the last minute, which they tend to do. So that made it a little bit more tense.
So you've got meetings scheduled, obviously, and planners that are worried about their event. So how do you work with those planners that have meetings scheduled during the hurricane?
It's not just the the conferences that are booked during the duration of the storm. It's what's going to be the aftermath. How many conferences are going to be impacted post-storm? So we put we did a chart. We knew what was coming in. We knew what was expected. We knew who we needed to communicate to immediately to let them know that they might want to consider making other plans. The airport was going to be closing. Your people might get in, but they might not get out. If you are unfamiliar with how to ride out a hurricane, you may not want to ride out a hurricane. We talk to the meeting planners. I'll make personal phone calls to anybody who I need to make personal phone calls to let them know exactly what's going on, exactly what their plan should be. The uncertainty is that these storms do shift so quickly that you could cancel a meeting, and then the storm could shift at the last minute, and then you've got a client who's unhappy because you proactively told them maybe you shouldn't come, and then nothing happens. We didn't have that this time because we did have a direct hit, it was not a direct hit on us. We had outer bands, but you just have to talk to people. You just have to communicate with them.
So being that we live in Florida, we understand the importance of hurricane insurance, hurricane coverage, and what that means. But what does it mean for folks that are planning meetings and events coming from out of state, and they're planning their meetings during hurricane season? Walk us through the importance of hurricane coverage and what it can do for planners.
The state of Florida has a hurricane insurance program, which any conference can sign up for. It is limited in its scope and it's limited in its funding, unfortunately. Hopefully the legislature, when it meets next year, will address that issue. And I think that we as a hospitality community should be talking to our legislators, whether it's the CVB side, the private sector side, talking to our legislators to encourage them to beef up the funding for that hurricane insurance program. But we do encourage our meeting planners, our conferences, our associations to sign up for that. It's first come, first serve. It's whoever puts in their claim first gets paid first until the money runs out. And I believe that if you're at the Broward County Convention Center, there's most likely a force majeure clause for acts of God, which this clearly is under no one's control but Mother Nature. So we talk about it with them. We let them know that we are in, or they will be in hurricane season. But you don't want to make them think that this is not a welcoming place to come during hurricane season, because the chances of us being hit are really, really slim. We haven't had a hit in 12 years.
So we made it through Hurricane Irma, and now we are in the aftermath. What are some lessons learned?
You can never over-communicate to the industry. One of the things that I think that we need to do as a CVB is really determine who needs to be in the room at the CVB to make the decisions on when to pull the trigger for communication A, communication B, communication C. We had a great team this time. I think we might want to expand it a little bit so that there are certain individuals that have specific jobs, rather than sitting around the table saying, okay, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. I think we're going to designate specific individuals within the CVB, either by title or by name, to do certain things as we go through the next hurricane season.
Stacey, thank you so much for your time and for everything that the Greater Fort Lauderdale CVB has done. And as Stacey mentioned, the state of Florida is open for business, including the west coast of Florida, which, as we know, was caught by surprise when the storm shifted its path to the west. We have the Naples Marco Island Everglades CVB. We want to thank you for joining us, and I'm sure you've been busy in the wake of Hurricane Irma and its aftermath, trying to get things up and running. And I love that Florida is open for business, including Marco Island, Everglades, and the Naples area. So let's talk about what that communication was like internally within the CVB when you realize Hurricane Irma is shifting your way.
We get constant communications from our emergency operations center, so we feel we're getting the most up-to-date information. We start making plans early on, getting in touch with our hotels, trying to know how many people they have in-house, what groups they might have with them, how long they're going to be there, and so forth, and to really know what the census is in all of our hotels. So we know that early on. Then as the storm gets closer, and in the case of this particular Hurricane Irma, early on it was pretty much all of the state, then it was the east coast of Florida, and then pretty quickly it was pretty obvious the west coast was going to get it, and that Naples was right in the crosshairs of the eye of the storm.
You know, these are the perfect case studies, unfortunately, but also fortunately, so we can all learn from each other. So what about for you guys? What were some of the lessons learned that you will hopefully be walking away with following Irma and implementing into the future should a massive storm like this occur again?
Communication, keeping up your databases, making sure that every department person had someone that they could communicate with, and making sure that we could communicate by text as well as email, phone when available. Many of the hotels didn't have phone service at all. So learning how to keep those lines of communication open, I think, was one of our biggest lessons.
One of the things we encountered was when we weren't getting answers to any of the lines at any of the hotels, the first thing you think, well, they're closed. You know, they don't have power, so they're obviously they're not going to be able to take evacuees perhaps from other areas. And in fact, we found out from text messaging they were open. They just didn't have phone service. So as Debbie said, it's so important to have multiple ways to communicate. The big group meeting hotels, when they were in the evacuation, or needed to evacuate, they've got plans to do that. They just need to know now is the time. Implement your plan.
I think everyone is curious to know where you guys stand now. How are the conditions there now following the storm?
Naples, Marco Island, Everglades area of Florida is open and ready to accept guests. The majority of our hotels by Early next week, we'll be back in full operation. We do have a couple that still need a little more time, but for the most part, we've got the majority of our hotels, restaurants, and other business ready to accept guests again.
Thank you, and we're happy to hear that you guys are also open for business. And as Florida embraces the post-Hurricane Irma business, the prayers continue to pour into those islands greatly impacted by Hurricane Maria. On behalf of MPI-TV, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next MPI-TV edition.